On January the 12th, 2010, an earthquake struck Haiti, causing widespread damage to an already fragile infrastructure. It was estimated that 300,000 individuals lost their lives in that 7.0 magnitude quake, and approximately 300,000 people were injured. The Haitian government reported that 250,000 residences, 30,000 commercial buildings, and 80% of the schools were destroyed or severely damaged. 1.5 Haitians were displaced and relocated in 1,555 temporary camps. In a survey of earthquake-related experiences associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, 90.5% of the survey respondents reported that they had at least one relative or friend who had died or was injured in the quake. Many low and middle income countries have underdeveloped mental health systems and limited or scarce mental health resources. A 2007 study of global mental health reported a number of barriers to developing and sustaining a viable mental health system in low and middle income countries. These include insufficient funding, the complexity of integrating mental health services into primary health care, the limited number of health professionals that are trained and supervised in mental health interventions, and the centralization of the limited services in the larger urban centers and the larger institutions, leaving the rural population without any services at all. The last that they identified was that mental health leaders themselves were often deficient in public health policy. What I experienced in Haiti was a situation where our already tenuous health system, with limited capacity to deal with physical issues, was completely overwhelmed by the demand for psychosocial intervention and mental health services. Let me invite you into a global conversation in the work that I do. I am a professor at Mount Royal University in the Department of Child Studies and Social Worker, but I have been and am a clinical therapist. The work that I did in Haiti was trauma therapy, and I'm going to share with you the experience of providing single-session therapy post-disaster. As research continues to explore the potential of single-session therapy to strengthen mental health services in high-income countries, the potential of single-session therapy to support and strengthen services in low-income countries, particularly post-disaster, should also be explored. Globally, trying to meet the demand, trying to decide what services are viable, trying to organize the services from a traditional mental health psychotherapy point of view has failed to provide an adequate service to those in need. Single-session therapy is an accepted and supported mental health intervention in high-income countries. Mental health practitioners have practiced single-session therapy for over 40 years. The overarching theoretical premise of single-session therapy is that change is inevitable and change is inherent in the process of life. Single-session therapists believe that clients only require the assistance of therapy and therapists for a brief period of time to enhance and restore their internal resources, to promote their resiliency and problem-solving skills. Although single-session therapy is readily available and sanctioned by the mental health systems in high-income countries, there are limited reports of utilizing single-session therapy in low and middle-income countries, particularly post-disaster. What I hope to share with you today is my experience and some of the reflections I have as a therapist in the work that I was able to do in Haiti 2 years after the earthquake. As I drove away from the airport in Port-au-Prince, I was struck by the state of recovery 2 years after the earthquake. On every street, there was at least one building that was still collapsed and seemingly frozen in time. Given the state of recovery 2 years later, I began to wonder about the mental health of the survivors, I began to wonder what resources might have been made available to assist them in dealing with the trauma that they may have experienced as survivors of the earthquake. The medical team that I worked with worked out of a clinic, an established clinic in Cité Soleil. Cité Soleil is one of the poorest communities in the Western Hemisphere. We also worked out of an unauthorized tent camp on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince called CAPFA. On the first day that the clinic opened, individuals began to line up around 4 o'clock in the morning. As the physicians on the medical team began to request from me mental health consults, it became apparent that many of the individuals were still experiencing deep psychological pain as a result of their experience in the quake. What I learned was none of them had had any mental health intervention. For those of us who do single-session therapy, what we know is that we only have 1 hour. And what struck me when I was in Haiti was the reality and the circumstances of what the heck can be accomplished in 1 hour. What I hope to do is show you how the framework of single-session therapy, the theoretical premises of that psychotherapy, were able to provide some assistance post-disaster to individuals who are experiencing deep psychological pain. As the physicians start to refer individuals for a mental health consult, I kept in mind the principles of single-session therapy. I asked them what it was that they needed, what they felt their specific issues were. We explored all of their attempted solutions in trying to deal with the trauma that they were experiencing. We identified the hurdles and the challenges that they experienced that led to them being stuck, that led to them feeling at times hopeless and helpless. And my job was to encourage them to look at new approaches. As a single-session therapist, I have 2 techniques I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. One of those techniques is reframing, offering individuals another lens. Equally as true, but a lens that offers the presenting problems and the issues as more manageable and offers some of the solutions as more practical, more meaningful, and more immediate. It was important for me to let people know that they would never see me again. In my practice in our high-income country, we know and we come to an agreement that this may be the only session. My clients are okay with that, and I'm okay with that. In Haiti, I found myself having some misgivings. Not only was this the only session that they would have with me, the likelihood of them having any follow-up interventions or psychosocial support was 0. Primarily, my job was to focus on their unique lived experience, what was happening for them, and what they needed to happen for them. For those of you who have done work in low and middle income countries, I think you understand the importance of the cultural relevance, particularly when it comes to issues of mental health. Culturally, in Haiti, the stigma for mental health means that for those individuals who are identified as being mentally ill, the probability of them being ostracized for the community is almost a given. Religious beliefs are paramount, and mental health issues are often connected to possession by the devil. So reframing is a technique that I often use here in Canada, and I used for almost every case in Haiti. The other technique that I used is a commendation. What I discovered in working with people struggling with trauma is they don't often recognize the existing resources that are still working for them that can be utilized and initiated. My job is to make observations of what I see in those strengths and how those strengths might assist them in dealing with their emotions. I'm going to share with you an example of a woman that I worked with, but I want to present you with a dilemma. She was referred to me from one of the physicians because the physician felt that she was depressed. She had lost her family in the earthquake. He wanted me to treat her for depression, which would be a pretty normal recommendation and a pretty acceptable recommendation for me in Canada. In Haiti, with limited resources and no access to mental health care and diagnosis, treating depression became meaningless. What I hung my hat on was what was meaningful was the knowledge that grief is universal. Let me introduce you to Rachel. When I met her, she was 75. Her neighbors brought her to the clinic because they were worried about her well-being. She was frail, malnourished, couldn't sleep, complained of headaches and muscle aches. The physician felt that her symptoms were being exacerbated by malnutrition, but believed that she was suffering from depression/grief because of the loss of her family. My job was to discover her unique experience. My hypothesis was that she was stuck in grief. My task was to offer a reframing. I wondered if for her, if she could remember her children and who they were, she would be less overwhelmed by the loss of her children and how they died. I asked her to tell me about each of her children. I asked her to tell me what she loved about each of her children. I asked her what her children would want for her. She thought for a minute. She said her children would want her to be happy, and their children would want her to know that they are safe with God. As she left, she thanked me. She said a burden had been lifted from her heart. And that she would talk to her children about what we had talked about. And she would tell them what she would begin to do. As the session ended, there were other ingredients. I taught her some stress management, particularly breathing. We spent some time practicing breathing exercises so that when she felt anxious and couldn't sleep, she could evoke the relaxation response and get some respite. More importantly, I worked with her neighbors, the two women that brought her, and we made an agreement that they would take charge and re-invite her and reintroduce her into the faith community. So in ending, I want to pose a couple caveats. Yeah, it worked for me. I was able to transfer this Western ideology of single-session psychotherapy to Haiti. It seemed to have a cultural fit as long as I paid attention to that, as long as I acknowledged the place of religion. But what I realized in the conversations that I've had since the years I've been down there is that the global conversation is moving towards a panacea, looking at single-session therapy as a way of replacing limited resources. My response is that single-session therapy has a lot of potential, but the potential is an adjunct to the existing mental health system. It's not me going down to Haiti, seeing people for one time, doing psychotherapy in a single session. It really is me and others going down to Haiti and training individuals to shore up their own system. Providing trauma treatment in Haiti was overwhelming. I've been a trauma therapist for probably 30 years. None of that shielded me from the abject poverty and the trauma that permeated every interaction. I thought that with my significant experience as a mental health professional and my experience in treating post-traumatic stress disorder, that in some way I would be buffered from that. Instead, The days became very long. Instead, I forewent nutrition and hydration to see yet one more individual. What I learned is that I need to make myself a priority. At the end of the day, I listen to music. It's funny how all this comes back, so my apologies. But the self-care is the anecdote that I want to leave with you. Being able to share the experience with colleagues, being able to make sure that I take a break, make sure that I have something to eat and something to drink, and maybe not spend the full day being immersed in the psychological pain of other individuals. So thank you.